Welcome, everyone. This is Jordan, and I'm the worship pastor here at Trevecca Community Church, and we are so glad that you're here with us today as we hear God's Word. Each week, we stream the service live from the sanctuary just for you. So come along with us now as we grow together and hear what God has to say to us.
From Matthew chapter 7, verses 13 and 14, and then 21, 1 through 12. Enter through the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the road is easy that leads to destruction, and there are many who take it. For the gate is narrow and the road is hard that leads to life, and there are few who find it. And when they had come near Jerusalem and had reached Bethphage at the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 disciples, saying to them, "Go into the villages ahead of you, and immediately you will find a donkey tied and a colt with her. Untie them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, just say this: the Lord needs them, and he will send them immediately." This took place to fulfill what had been spoken through the prophet. "Tell the daughter of Zion, look, your king is coming to you, humble and mounted on a donkey, and on a colt, the foal of a donkey." The disciples went and did as Jesus had directed them. They brought the donkey and the colt and put their cloaks on them, and he sat on them. A very large crowd spread their cloaks on the road, and others cut branches from the trees and spread them on the road. The crowds that went ahead of him and that followed were shouting, "Hosanna to the Son of David! Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord! Hosanna in the highest heaven!" And when he entered Jerusalem, the whole city was in turmoil, asking, "Who is this?" The crowds were saying, "This is the prophet Jesus from Nazareth in Galilee." Then Jesus entered the temple and drove out all who were selling and buying in the temple, and he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Thanks, Michael. Jesus is inviting you to meet him through the narrow gate. Inviting you to come and to meet with him. And I don't know how that strikes you. This invitation to walk through a narrow gate. I imagine for some, the idea of a narrow gate as opposed to a wide gate sounds very un-Southern. Do you know what I mean? Like a narrow gate does not sound like y'all come. There's plenty of room, the gate's wide, pull up a chair, y'all come, right? Like a narrow gate sounds inhospitable in some ways. And so what is Jesus talking about with this narrow gate that leads to life and the wide gate that leads to destruction? But I learned that I think the ancient world understood a narrow passage and a wide passage very differently than we do in the modern world. In fact, I had an opportunity to learn it sort of firsthand. One of the things that I was blessed to do on my sabbatical was to take a pilgrimage walk through Scotland. Actually, through a place that's called Fife. Some people still call it the Kingdom of Fife because it's a very old place, and everywhere you walk, there's old castles and old walls and old churches. In fact, I'd walked so far one day, and I'd walked past so many castles, that I walked past a castle that was way up on a cliff, and if I wanted to go see it, I would have to walk upstairs, and I thought, nah, I'm good. Just didn't need to see another castle that day. My legs hurt too bad. But I got to walk through a part of the world that still has a lot of the ancient parts of it, castle walls and things like that. And there were a lot of doors carved into walls like this one. It's a wall near the sea, obviously, where ships could come and dock in there by the sea. But you notice that doorway is very narrow. You cannot carry your boat in through that doorway. If I were standing by the doorway, it would come right to the top of my head. I had to duck just a little bit to walk through. And it's just barely wider than my shoulders. I'm not a very large person. And so to get in through that doorway, you cannot come barging in with an army. you have to be invited. You see, the narrow door is the door where you come to be recognized by someone who knows you and who opens the door and who welcomes you. That's what the narrow door was about for the ancient world. It was this passageway that you come to for safe passage. You see, wide entry points are points where anybody can barge in through, and you might get in, but you're probably going to be in a sketchy part of town, and who knows if you'll really be safe, and there's probably not going to be anyone to welcome you. But a narrow gate, a narrow passage is one where you can be known and you can be welcomed. It's kind of like Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, if you seek, you'll find, and if you knock, the door will be opened. Well, the narrow gate is the one you have to seek and knock and trust that it will be opened. At one point in my journey, I realized that I'd gone the wrong way for a while. And I will go back in a minute and kind of take you through the journey. But at one point I realized I'd gone the wrong way for a while. And to get back to the path, I was going to have to walk backward, like at least half a mile. And I was very, very tired. And I did not want to have to add another mile to my journey just to get back when I realized that I'd basically walked down a path that was all gated off and I was obstructed from getting back to the path that I'd been on. But I found this hole in the fencing, this narrow hole. And I realized that if I could slide through that hole, I would not have to walk the extra mile to get back to the path. But to get through this narrow hole, I had to get down. First, I just got down on my hands and knees, but I still wasn't small enough, especially I had a big backpacker's backpack on. And I still, even on my hands and knees, I was not low enough and small enough to get through that hole. So I had to take the pack partway off, hug it to my body, and get down on my belly and wriggle through the mud to get through that hole. But I saved myself a mile. That was a narrow gate. See, first, like I said, the narrow gate is the one that you have to seek and knock. You have to be recognized, let in, and welcome. But the narrow gate is also the one where you gotta get down low. You have to humble yourself. You got to take off whatever pack you're carrying, whatever baggage you've brought with you. It's going to be too big to get through there. The narrow gate was one where soldiers couldn't bring their weapons. You'd have to get down off of your horse to get through the narrow gate. So when Jesus says that narrow is the gate to lead to life, I think that's what Jesus is talking about. He's talking about the gate that you got to seek and you got to knock and you got to be welcomed, but also the one that humbles you, to take off all of your baggage and to be welcomed through the narrow gate. Jesus is inviting you to meet him through the narrow gate. On my sabbatical, I felt a really clear invitation to meet with Jesus. The first week of sabbatical, I went to a prayer retreat at a prayer house, and I was going to spend 24 hours in prayer and silence. It's a prayer house that is owned and maintained by a spiritual director, this really wise, gracious woman who met with me at the very beginning of my 24 hours. We were going to have an hour-long spiritual direction session, and then I was going to spend 24 hours in prayer and silence. I know, some of you are thinking Disneyland, right? Woohoo! But I'd been looking forward to it. I met with the spiritual director, and I immediately, eagerly tell her, hey, here's what I have planned for the next 24 hours. Here's all the list of things I'm going to pray about, and here are the spiritual stuff that I'm going to read, the scriptures I'm going to pour over. Here are the things that I'm going to journal through. Here's how I'm going to really be productive with this time that I have. And she was so gracious and sweet and patient. She listened to me, and then she said, Shawna, that all sounds wonderful. But if you came to noon tomorrow, 24 hours from now, and you had accomplished none of that. But you just let God love on you. How would that feel? And I was stunned into silence. And she gave a minute for the silence, and then she said, "Don't answer that." We kept on talking. But over those 24 hours, I did just that. I took off the metaphorical backpack, if you will, of all the plans that I had brought into that time. And in silence, I let God love on me and received a kind of healing that I didn't even know I needed. Jesus was inviting me to meet him through the narrow gate. Thomas Merton says that when God invites you to him, there is an implicit promise that he will give you every grace you need to meet him. I started planning my sabbatical over a year ago, looking at dates and thinking about strategically what would work the best and how to not miss anything too important in the life of the church. But I still didn't really have a clear idea of what I was going to do on those 8 weeks. Until one day I had the privilege of sitting on a long airplane ride next to my dear friend, Kathy Morey. And God loves you, but Kathy Morey has a wonderful plan for your sabbatical. And we just started brainstorming and talking and dreaming about what it might be like on sabbatical to take a pilgrimage and to learn to be a pilgrim, to be a person who meets God in the journey and not just in the destination. And so the wheels began to turn and plans started to kick into gear, thinking about what it would be like to walk a pilgrim trail. I started learning about pilgrim trails in Scotland. There are many, not as popular or famous as some of the ones in Spain and France and Italy, but some pilgrim trails in Scotland. I learned about a pilgrim trail called St. Margaret's Way, named after St. Margaret, who was the former Queen of Scotland back in the 16th century. Margaret was originally Hungarian, born in the country of Hungary, but she was taken as a child to England, where she was part of the royal family there. Well, there was a plot to kill her family. And so her family has to escape like in the middle of the night. And they board a ship to head back to Hungary, where they think that they'll be safe and in familiar territory. But on this boat ride where they are fleeing for their lives, this wind picks up and there's this intense storm and it blows them off course. And they land on the coast of Scotland, which at the time for the people of England was thought to be this very rough territory that a lot of people were actually kind of afraid of. And so they land on the coast of Scotland. But Margaret wins the heart of the Scottish people, and she even wins the heart of the King of Scotland, and she becomes Queen of Scotland. Well, Margaret was also a devout woman of God, and so she often wanted to take pilgrimage from Edinburgh, where the castle was that she lived in Scotland, up to St. Andrews, this beautiful large cathedral that was thought to house the bones of St. Andrew, the fisherman apostle who was crucified on a sideways cross. Margaret would want to leave her fineries of the castle in Edinburgh and take this journey up so she could pray in this holy place. But the thing about Edinburgh and St. Andrews, there's the sound of fife that goes through it. And it goes very, very far inland, and it's about a mile wide, water for the most part. And so in order to make this trail, while it might only be about 60 miles or so as a crow flies, you'd have to go terribly far inland to be able to get up to St. Andrews. Well, Margaret, as queen, was able to charter a ferry to just take her across. But she realized that other pilgrims who didn't have the means that she had also might like to take this trip to this holy place. And so Margaret began what is still today called the Queen's Ferry. And she began this ferry to take pilgrims across this channel so that they could get to this holy site and take this journey to meet with God. Margaret was, in fact, I think I've got a picture of Pilgrim's Point. This is Pilgrim's Point, where the pilgrims would actually land when they would come across from the ferry. For hundreds of years, pilgrims would make this journey. Margaret was a woman who was blown by the wild wind of the Spirit to some place she never meant to be, and blazed a path for other pilgrims to follow on their journey to meet with Jesus. And I wanted to be one of those pilgrims. So I started to plan and strategize the journey, and I was so excited about the idea of pilgrimage, where anybody that has ever talked to Kathy Morey for any period of time, you can become very excited for these awesome plans, and I couldn't wait. Last October, there were some events in my life that were very unexpected that changed everything very suddenly for me. I won't go into any details, but I essentially had an event that was quite traumatic, in which I no longer felt safe. It was an event in which I came face to face with the vulnerability of women in this world and my own mortality. And that traumatic event made it so that I felt unsafe, even sometimes just walking through my own neighborhood. And I didn't know how in the world, if I couldn't just walk through my own neighborhood, I was going to walk 70 miles by myself through a foreign country. And so plans all went on pause. And I just had to trust in that time that whatever my sabbatical needed to be, it would be. Slowly, as I was in that pause and praying and trusting God, there were some things that began to fall into place. Friends that were in the UK that reached out to me and said, hey, I'd be willing to meet you on this journey. And friends that lived in Scotland that said, I know that trail. We don't live far. We'd be happy to meet you on that trail. And it just felt like things were falling into place without my even having to try. And I realized that if God was calling me to him, God would provide every grace I needed to meet him. I began in the city of Edinburgh. Not Edinburgh, by the way, which Scottish people will correct you if you say it incorrectly. Edinburgh. There's another, there's another syllable there that is hard to see. But I began in the city of Edinburgh. And this city, it's busy and noisy and full of life. And I started at the castle where Queen Margaret herself lived. It's a place that hundreds of people that morning were lined up to get into the castle of Edinburgh. It is this famous place. It's where Mary, Queen of Scots, lived. And all kinds of incredible people of power have walked to the halls of the Edinburgh Castle. And the line was just crazy to get inside that day. But that wasn't actually the technical starting place for this pilgrim walk. No, the starting place was a little further down at a small church where I found a statue of a pilgrim. The statue of a pilgrim looked like the kind of person you would not see walking through a castle. Person dressed very humbly, with bare feet, holding a walking stick and reaching out an empty bowl, as if they're extending it, hoping for hospitality from strangers to provide what they need every day of the journey. And so I spent a while praying with the pilgrim. It's funny, there wasn't anybody lined up to see the pilgrim statue. And so after a while praying, I put my backpack on and clipped it in place, and I started off on my journey. I was so excited walking through the bustling streets of Edinburgh, and I was walking quite quickly. If anybody's ever walked with me, you know I'm a fast walker. I'm sorry. In fact, I feel like I need to apologize to my own mother because I love walking with her and talking with her, but she'll often say, can you slow down? I'm a fast walker, and if you give me a destination that I'm supposed to get to, I'm going to try to be like the fastest person that has ever made it to that destination. It's how I'm wired. And so I knew that night, because every night, I'd stay at different kind of points along the journey. That night, I needed to get to the Queen's Ferry. And so I thought, I'm going to make it to the Queen's Ferry faster than any pilgrim has ever made it to the Queen's Ferry. And I've got my backpack all clipped on and my hiking boots on, and I set off, and I'm just ready to go. Pilgrimage, baby! And after about an hour, I started to panic because I hurt so bad. 1 hour in, maybe 3-4 miles, I don't know. I was in so much pain already. My back hurt and my legs didn't feel right and my feet hurt. And I thought, what is going on? I practiced. I had gone on so many practice hikes with the backpack and everything, but I realized the backpack is heavier than the one I practiced with. and everything just felt different. My feet felt different, and I was trying to walk as quickly as I normally walk. And so as I walked, I began to make technical adjustments, thinking, okay, maybe it's just that the pack is in the wrong place. So I tightened a strap here and I adjusted a strap there. That didn't do it. And maybe I thought, it's my boots. And so I kind of untied and relaced up my boots, and that didn't do it. I thought maybe I'll sort of change up my gait and try to change my stride a little bit, and that didn't do it. There was no technical adjustment that I could make that would allow me to walk at an unsustainable pace to make this journey. I finally had to admit that the speed with which I wanted to walk would not sustain me to where God was calling me to go. And the only thing I could do was slow down. And as I walked, I just started to breathe and pray, slower still, slower still. Every time something would ache or hurt, I would find that if I just slowed down a little bit more, it would be okay. People passed me, which I do not love. This older woman passed me carrying her groceries to the place where to her home. She, arms full of groceries. She came and walked alongside me and told me all about how she immigrated there from India 15 years ago. And she carries her groceries on this same trail every day. And so she just talked with me for a while, carried her groceries, and we walked together. I only had to go slower. Apparently, God wanted to meet me at the speed of humility. I made it to Queens Ferry that night, where I stayed in the guest room of a woman named Anne and her son Houston and their parakeet Macy. Macy made the sounds like a cell phone is ringing. So constantly I thought, somebody's calling, just pick up the phone. But it was Macy. They were so gracious and welcomed me and immediately made me a cup of tea. She told me her life story and I told her mine. The next morning as I set off, I told her that I would be praying for her and for her ill mother. And Anne is not a woman who prays, but she did tell me that she would be thinking of me as I would be taking my walk and my journey. So I sat off the next morning praying for Anne and for her son Houston. And I crossed the Queens Ferry Bridge, this marvel of modern engineering that St. Margaret could not have imagined, taking a slow ferry across, and I just got to walk across this incredible bridge. I made it up the way to the coast of Fife, and across the bay, I could see Edinburgh. I could see the castle where I had begun my starting point. Spring was in full bloom in Scotland. There are these yellow flowers all along the trail called gorse, and it smelled like coconut, which not many flowers smell like coconut. These flowers smelled like coconut. And all I had to do all day was walk, so I could actually stop and smell the flowers that smelled like coconut. It was awesome. I made my way to St. Bridget's Church and took my pack off to pray and rest. St. Bridget's Church, I won't go into too much, but it's a place where Scotland has felt the tensions between Celtic Christianity and Roman Catholic Christianity and Protestant Christianity. All these different brands of Christianity that have been sort of fighting one another to have superiority over one another, to get to prescribe for others how they should walk the way of Jesus. I sat there and prayed for a long time at St. Bridget's Church. All along the way, there were paths and gates, sort of like I think one in the next picture. There were these gates to make sure that animals didn't wander off where they're not supposed to wander. And so along the trail, you would pass through gates that would say, please close behind you. So you'd pass through and then close it behind you so that sheep didn't get out. Walking among like sheep and cows and things like that. This was also the day that my cell phone died. I had taken too many pictures, and my backup charger was also out of juice, and I didn't know how to get to my hotel. I was entering this little fishing town called Burnt Island when some lovely people offered to walk with me and help me find my way into town, find a place to charge my phone so that I could figure out which hotel I was staying in that night. It was humbling indeed. Day 3 was meant to be the longest day of hiking, and so I set out very early that morning, walking slowly. This was the day that I really began to notice all the walls that were all over the seaside, huge walls that were built along the coast. And as I walked past them, these giant walls built for safety, I noticed my own little safety device. I took with me this little safety device that was clipped into my backpack. It's a device that if any time I felt unsafe for any reason, I could pull it, kind of like a grenade, basically. And as soon as it becomes detached, it sets off an alarm. And as I was walking past these walls and hearing the jingle and feeling the sway of my own safety device, I realized that's really what those walls are. You see, my safety device makes me feel safe, but it doesn't guarantee that I will be safe. And those walls, they don't guarantee that nothing can get over them or past them or knock them down, but they made people feel safe. And so for thousands of years, this is how we have made our way, just doing our very best to feel safe in a scary world. Somehow, in Scotland, in March, I was blessed with 3 days of hiking in gorgeous sunshine. And the people of Scotland seemed so delighted by that. Everybody was out on the trail walking and biking. And when people would see me with my backpack and immediately know, there's a tourist, people, strangers, never met me before, would look at me, their faces would light up, and they'd say, "Oh, lovely weather we're having." Like they were so delighted, like they personally delivered this weather for me, right? They were so delighted by this. It was beautiful weather, but then on the 4th day, the rain came, because it is Scotland after all. And by the 4th day, absolutely everything hurt. This was the day that I had to wriggle under that fence in the mud. I had to walk so slowly that day, walking and praying and walking and praying. And that was when I finally reached the speed to see the glory of God in a snail shell. You see, there were snails attached to the reeds near the ocean. And I noticed that look at the colors of those snail shells. That is a green snail shell and orange. And I've got pictures of blue and pink and yellow. At the end of the day, at the end of every day, I'd send Tim like all my pictures that I took that day. And that day he said, "Wow, I really didn't expect so many snail pictures." But as I would walk and just delight in the beauty of these snails, they looked like Easter eggs. I couldn't help. And I know you might think I'm insane. I would bend down and whisper to the snails, "The kingdom of God is near." Do you think I'm crazy? No. Just the beauty, like the glory of God in these beautiful snail shells that had I been walking as fast as I normally walk, I would have blasted right past. This was also the day I realized I was in real danger of injuring myself. I was in hiking boots, walking on beach sand in the rain, which did not do my Achilles tendons any favors. This was probably also the only stretch of the whole journey that there were no bus routes and no Uber or Lyft services. And so I just kept walking slower and slower. I'd stop and say, "God, you promised to meet me, and I know there will be grace for this journey." I got to a roadside cafe at about 2:00 in the afternoon. I still had a few miles to go, and I was hurting so bad. I didn't know what I was going to do. I sat down with a cup of tea, praying for God's grace, and this might not be the most spiritual thing that happened on the journey, but it still could have been from the Lord. Suddenly, the music that was playing overhead in the cafe began to play Beyonce, "I'm a Survivor." So I took my inspiration from Queen Margaret and Queen Bee, and I put my backpack back on, and I kept walking. I woke up on that 5th morning. This was my last day when I was supposed to walk into St. Andrews. I only had 5 or 6 miles left to go, and I'd planned it to be the shortest day, knowing I'd be tired and I'd want to spend time in the city of St. Andrews. But I hurt so badly. I wrapped my feet up with tape the best I could. I'd brought athletic tape and watched YouTube videos for how to wrap up Achilles tendons. But I'm sitting in the inn that I stayed at the breakfast area, and there's a woman bringing my breakfast. And I told her, I'm trying to get to St. Andrews, but I just hurt so very badly. And she said, oh, dear, you know that there's a bus that picks up right out in front of this inn that takes you directly into St. Andrews. And I said, oh, grace of God? Yes, please. I will receive that. I went to go and try to get on the bus, however, standing on the right side of the road. And the bus, of course, stops on the left side of the road in the UK. So I had to chase the bus down, wave at the bus driver, run across. Luckily, he stopped. I got onto the bus. He was very angry with me and said, why were you on the right side of the road? And I said, I'm sorry, I'm an American. And he rolled his eyes and said, oh, that explains it. I got off the bus just outside of St. Andrews so that I could still hobble my way into the city. And hobble I did. My right hip was screaming at me, and my feet were so sore. But I walked in that last stretch to see the Cathedral of St. Andrews. I remembered the pilgrim statue from the beginning of my journey. Bare feet with a walking staff in hand and that bowl outstretched. I felt like I was entering that city a different person than I had started my journey. But really, I think what had happened was that so much had fallen away in the walking. Not all of the things maybe, but so many of the things that were not really who I am, created in the image of God. They just got left on the trail because they were too heavy to take with me on the journey. And as so many of those things just began to fall away, I became lighter and freer and closer to the God who was calling me to meet him. I arrived at the cathedral in St. Andrews, the ruins of this beautiful cathedral. It was once the seat of religious power in the Western world. I had no idea the significance of St. Andrews, the popes and bishops, kings and queens who all worshiped there, all to get close to the bones of this fisherman apostle. This fisherman who one day had just been out doing his job when Jesus came by and invited him to follow. And so Andrew put down his net. He dropped his livelihood. He dropped the very thing that was supposed to provide for him. It was going to be too heavy to take on the journey to follow Jesus. So he dropped his net and he entered through the narrow way. Sitting there in this place near the bones of St. Andrews, arriving at that place didn't feel magical. There were no angel choirs. The heavens didn't open. There wasn't like a revelation written in the clouds. I stayed there and prayed for a long time, and then I went to my hotel room. I began to pray and journal. I journaled about all the grace of God that had met me over those 5 days. And I began to reflect on the fact that just 6 months ago, I'd been afraid to walk in my own neighborhood, and now by the grace of God, I had walked 70 miles in a foreign country. Slid on my belly in the mud under fences and fell down beaches and received hospitality from strangers. There's some saint who said, there is no way, the way is made by walking. It's a saying that's actually attributed to a lot of different saints. And probably that's because it's just so simple and so true. You see, there isn't magic in taking one path. It wasn't like if I would just walk on this path, if I'd follow the GPS from point A to point B, I would magically be transformed. It wasn't like that. There's no magic in taking the path. The grace is in the journey to meet with God, the longing that draws you there. And you only find that grace by putting one foot in front of the other and just keep walking. Today is Palm Sunday, the day that Jesus and his disciples entered into Jerusalem. Jerusalem was a city that Jews all over the ancient world would take pilgrimage to. In fact, still today, it's a place that people will take pilgrim journeys to go to Jerusalem. And on these pilgrim walks, they would sing songs like Psalm 118 that Pastor Jordan read at the beginning of the service. They would sing these songs like, "Blessed is the name of the Lord, Hosanna in the highest." These pilgrims would sing these songs as they would walk this journey to meet with God. I bet that day as Jesus was walking into Jerusalem, he was with a whole crowd of people who had worn out their Achilles tendon, had busted their right hip, and had sore backs. And maybe, just maybe, along the way, they had stopped to delight in the glory of God in a snail shell or smell the beautiful gorse, the flowers growing. But Jesus walked up to Jerusalem with a group of pilgrims. But just before he got into the city, you see, pilgrims, before they entered the holy city, I read about it this week in a commentary by Roger Hahn, faithful man of God. You see, when pilgrims would enter the holy city, if they were riding on a beast like a donkey or a horse, they would get off the beast first. They would dismount, kind of like you have to do to enter through the narrow gate. It was a way of humbling yourself, to say, I'm not barging in through the wide gate. I am here humbling, entering someone else's house. I'm here to ask for entry, to seek and to knock and to trust that the door will be open. So pilgrims would get down off of their horses, but Jesus has his disciples go and find a donkey. But not just a donkey, the foal of a donkey. So it's still this beast of humility, but Jesus is not coming into the city as a pilgrim. Jesus is the one who welcomes pilgrims. He's coming into his Father's house. Jesus is home, and he's making a home to welcome us into. And so Jesus rides into the city on the donkey, and all these pilgrims around him, whether or not they fully understood what was going on, they're singing the pilgrim songs. Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord, Hosanna in the highest. And here comes Jesus riding on this donkey into his Father's house, there to welcome the pilgrims home. Even if he has to clean house a bit to be able to make a space for wanderers. Turn over a few tables, dust out a few money changers. Jesus is inviting you to meet him through the narrow gate today, this Palm Sunday. He's inviting you to meet him through the narrow gate. And I know, pilgrim, the road might have been long and hard, as the way so often is. I don't know what kind of journey you've been on to get where you are today. I don't know if you have busted your Achilles tendon or you've just worn out your spirit. But Jesus is welcoming you, inviting you to come through the narrow way. Now, just so you know, that is the way where you've got to put some stuff down. You can't come barging in through this gate. You can't come carrying your weapons and your possessions and your stuff. You got to put all that down. And maybe even get down off of your horse and humble yourself. But the grace of God will meet you. You see, if God is calling you to him, God will provide every grace that you need to meet him. And so, pilgrim, God is calling you today and will give you every grace that you need. I'm so grateful for the grace of God that met me. Every morning I would wake up and think, I can't believe I get to do this today. I can't believe I get to be a pilgrim. Like, just all I had to do for the day was think about getting from point A to point B and being with Jesus. You know, it's so easy to get back into the routine of life and to forget that that's actually every day. But the grace of God meets us in the ordinary places. God wants to meet with you today. If you'd like to find a place of prayer, these altars are a really great way to humble yourself. They're not magic, right? Just like the city of St. Andrews, it wasn't a magic place, but sort of like entering into a narrow gate where you humble yourself. When we come and kneel at altars, that's a posture of humility where we make ourselves small. And some of you, maybe you spend a lot of time feeling small already. And so maybe for you, if you already feel like you spend a lot of time feeling small, maybe think about kneeling at an altar as a place of rest, where you can take your pack off for a while and just lay it down, not have to carry it. Whatever this prayer time is like, Pastor Tim's going to come and lead us in prayer, prepare us for the table. Whatever this prayer time is like, I just hope that you will let God love on you. Enjoy this time to just be in his presence. God will give you every grace you need to meet him. Although earlier was stretched on the words to the Apostles' Creed, but you all had it so down. Would you receive a blessing that you can carry with you, wherever God might send you, to the places where perhaps only you can go carrying grace? And so now in the power of the Holy Spirit, may you be granted every grace that you need to meet with a God who is inviting you to come through the narrow way. So go and meet him. Amen.
Thanks for tuning in. Remember, you can join us in person in the sanctuary at 10:30 a.m. on Sunday mornings, live on YouTube or through our sermon podcast. If you'd like to give, you can do so at trevecca.church/give. Any other ministry resources can be found on our website. However you join us, however you choose to engage, know that you are loved. We're grateful for you.